Divinity Soup, an ancestor-inspired recipe starring collard greens. My name is Sheila Brown, and I am a daughter of the Most High, just like many of you. In spring 2016, I'd reached a pivotal crossroad in my life. I weighed 300 pounds and felt on the verge of a heart attack. I was constantly in pain, short of breath, and physically and mentally exhausted. I didn't look good in anything I wore, and as a result, felt I was unattractive and avoided going out. I was miserable. One day, I received a message from God that set me on a different path. I found value, purpose, and direction. I began treating my body as God's gift to be cherished and honored as a sacred temple. I saw it as a machine entrusted to me to achieve my mission, and I knew then that to accomplish the goals I'd realized, I would have to start properly caring for and maintaining my body while I still had time. This created a timeline and set me on a journey that includes this book. My mindset shifts significantly impacted everything I did, starting with grooming, diet, and physical fitness. Along my journey, I had to overcome obesity and adverse health conditions to win my uphill battle. I wrote this book to help others who share these struggles, to show you that you can fine-tune your machine, the body that is God's gift to you, to function properly with the right maintenance. You start simply by supplying it with the right source of fuel through a plant-based diet. In addition to cooking and writing, I also enjoy being a mother, lawyer, speaker, personal health coach, and a strategic planner. I've consulted with CEOs and executive teams to develop multi-year strategic plans. Today, I use these skills to empower Black women, the daughters of the Most High, by helping them to develop pathways to divine health and navigate the threats and opportunities that are present along the way. I help African women devise their own personal strategic health plans. I coach them toward lifelong journeys of healing and optimum physical capacity by removing negative eating habits and behaviors. Divine health is a state of being in excellent physical condition, possessing a sound mind, and experiencing spiritual balance. I hope to see you there soon. Feeding both halves of the hunger. Years ago, I read a book by Khalil Gibran entitled The Prophet. Of all the poignant, thought-provoking proverbs it contained, the one I cherished most was a discussion about work. By happenstance, the work I did most at the time involved cooking daily for a large number of people. While I recognized the importance of the work I did as a cook, I didn't think of it as a particularly enjoyable occupation for me. That is, until I read this passage from the prophet. Work is love made visible, and if you cannot work with love but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. It then reads, "For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half man's hunger. And if you grudge the crushing of grapes, your grudge distills a poison in the wine." Khalil Gibran seemed to suggest that there are actually two aspects to man's hunger. One is clearly physiological and can be satisfied by the consumption of food. The other is more esoteric in nature. It could be understood, however, to mean something else is responsible for nourishing the remainder of man's hunger. That something is love. Love addresses the aspect of hunger we experience with our souls. It manifests in us as wellness, contentment, joy, satisfaction, and healing. It means the food itself was good, and the person who prepared it is also good-natured and infused divine energy into making it a wholesome meal. Grandma Betty. The pot of collard greens. My grandmother is a perfect illustration of this concept. A meal prepared in Grandma Betty's kitchen was a special experience for me growing up. Anyone who had the privilege of partaking of Grandma Betty's dinner table can attest to what it is like to have both halves of their hunger satisfied. Grandma Betty was always intentional about her cooking. She was even known to plan a meal a week or more in advance. She might say one day, "I think I want me some greens." Those who knew her understood that to mean a pot of greens would materialize at some point in the near future. Not necessarily tomorrow or the day after that, but definitely not the same day she uttered the idea aloud. With this realization came the development of patience. After making her plans to cook collard greens known, she eventually got around to buying the ingredients she needed. This too was an act of intentionality that called for patience if you had to go shopping with her. She would spend ample time combing through the vegetables to carefully select 5 to 7 large bushels of freshly picked collard green leaves, complete with dirt, insects, and stems. Each bushel had to be the right size, shape, color, volume, and age. Once she brought them home, the next phase was to prepare the ingredients. This could involve several days with Grandma Betty's Southern style methods and approach to cooking. Cleaning collard greens the old fashioned way was such a technical and time consuming process that it took nearly 35 years before I even mustered the courage and resolve to attempt a pot of greens on my own. I felt completely inadequate because for Grandma Betty, washing collard greens was just as involved as washing clothing, literally. She'd begin by filling her double sink with Tide powder detergent and water and soaking the greens for an entire day. She'd then hand wash the leaves, scrubbing them together, lifting and dunking them in the water repeatedly for 2 or 3 rounds. Next came the rinsing. She would run the faucet over the greens for hours, it seemed, to remove every trace of detergent residue until she was satisfied that no earthworm, gnat, or virus could survive. Finally, the greens were cut down to the desired size and cooked. The entire collard green process took several days. After all that work, the end result was a pot of greens reduced in volume to an amount that barely filled 3/4 of her stock pot. But please trust me when I say it was well worth the effort to her and her family. What she lost from her collards in quantity, she gained back in taste threefold. Not only that, Grandma Betty lived for the compliments, expressions of gratitude, joy, and satisfaction that her collard greens were known to bring her family, especially her son, my father, Carlos Brown, who adored them. Considering their impact on our family, I would surmise that Grandma's collard greens give life to Khalil Gibran's expression that work indeed is love made visible. My grandmother's kitchen provided countless opportunities to experience food prepared with love. But what happens to the spiritual side of hunger when food is not prepared with love? To answer this question, it is necessary to examine African American eating habits. To do that, we must analyze our current relationship with the fast food industry. Age of fast food, health disparities. When I was a child, the majority of our family's meals were made at home. Eating at restaurants was a special treat, especially fast food spots. Today, however, is an age where people expect everything in an instant, even their meals. According to the latest statistics, this is especially true for African Americans. A study conducted by the Center for Disease Control reports that between 2013 and 2016, a higher percentage of Black adults consumed fast food than whites, Asians, and Hispanics. No wonder the fast food industry reigns supreme in the Black community with no signs of abating. It's true. African Americans, like other consumers, want greater convenience, speed, and cheaper prices when it comes to buying food. But this convenience comes at a huge cost with health issues that disproportionately impact the Black community, especially for African American women who experience rates of obesity higher than any other ethnic group. Much of this has to do with the addictive quality of fast food, which tend to be high in calories, sugar, salt, and fat. But it is also possible that some of it is spiritual as well. Bring back tradition. Make home cooked meals. Spiritual or not, it is time to restore African Americans to health and steer the Black community as a whole back to a tradition of cooking meals at home. The benefits of doing so are many, including better health outcomes, an infusion of nutrition in each meal, and a return to the dinner table where families build bonds, lifelong memories, and positive eating habits. Another reason to eat at home is safety. Food sanitation is always a huge risk when eating out. Many variables can lead to sickness, which make all consumers completely vulnerable to the efficacy, hygiene, and code of ethics of restaurant owners and their employees. Many places tout safe food handling policies and are regulated by local municipalities, but procedures are often haphazardly followed or completely disregarded. Divinity soup, the ancestors. For African Americans, collard greens are a special dish tracing back to the days when our ancestors were enslaved in this country. It was one of the few plants that enslaved Africans were allowed to grow in their gardens. Even though African people already had a tradition of eating greens cooked down into a low gravy and drinking the juices known as pot liquor, they likely first encountered the dark leafy green in the early 1600s when they arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. In her cookbook, Soul Food, Classic Cuisine from the Deep South, Sheila Ferguson says, greens were vital to the health of the slaves and were adopted throughout the South by the poor whites when they realized their nutritional value. Divinity soup is the gift I received from the ancestors. It is a recipe that came to me while reflecting on how to overcome my anxiety about cooking collard greens. I was afraid I could not measure up to my grandmother's high standard of meal preparation. I replayed her admonitions about cooking greens without properly cleaning them so many times that I believed I was unworthy of making an effort. But after completing a juice fast and boosting my confidence, I was sure that I could try, despite the fact that I would not be using animal fat, a critical part of the recipe for collard greens in the Southern tradition. Nonetheless, I rolled up my sleeves, disinfected my kitchen, filled my sink with baking soda and water, placed the collard greens inside, soaked them for 30 minutes, cleaned and rinsed them and my other ingredients thoroughly, cut them, and cooked them using the intuitive knowing that must have come from my grandmother. Now, I wish to share this same inspiring recipe with you. Wow, thank you for listening to this story. Hopefully, now you are inspired to get in the kitchen and try making this wonderful soup. Divinity soup is just one of many delicious, healthy, and inspiring recipes I use daily on my journey to a state of divine health. If you desire more vegan, gluten free recipes, try my new book, Sometimes Raw, Sometimes Cooked, Always Divinely Prepared. You can find this book and more information about me and my journey to divine health by visiting www.SheilaBrownSpeaks.com.